Welcome to DLS's student webinar series. In this webinar, we'll look at speaking and the difference between accuracy and fluency. This is the second in a series on speaking. In this webinar, we'll start off by defining what we mean by accuracy and fluency. Then we'll discuss how accuracy and fluency interact in developing speaking proficiency. We'll move on to look at activities that target improving fluency and activities that target improved accuracy. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about finding a balance between the two. Let's start off by defining what we mean by accuracy. When we say accuracy, often the first thing that comes to mind is getting it right or correctness, and we often think of grammar. And grammar is a big part of accuracy, but it also includes pronunciation and vocabulary. Accuracy is overall focused on correctness. When it comes to fluency, this can be a little harder to define. Take a moment and think about what fluency means to you. Think about one or two words that first come to mind when you think of fluency. The word fluency can be a little confusing to define because often, in layman's terms, fluency is used to mean proficiency. Someone might say, "Oh, I'm fluent in Spanish," when what they really mean is, "I'm proficient in Spanish." For linguists, language researchers, or language teachers, fluency is much more specific. It's one aspect of speaking ability, and it's often contrasted with accuracy. Fluency is defined as smooth, rapid, effortless use of language and continuity of speech. And there are a few important elements that we can take from this definition. You can see that fluency involves speech that has few pauses and few hesitations. Fluency is also speech that is effortless, speech that is easy, where someone doesn't have to work too hard or think too much. And linguists also use this term quite a lot, automatic or automaticity, where again, and this is connected to effortlessness, someone can speak automatically. Without having to think about something, they can say a lot of words very easily. And that's what we mean when we talk about fluency. Now that we've defined what accuracy and fluency mean, let's take a moment to examine how they interact when it comes to proficiency. On the left, you'll probably recognize the ILR Level 3 descriptor for speaking. And you can see that this is taken from the ILR descriptor. It's not the complete level descriptor. And you can see that references to accuracy have been highlighted in yellow. Take a moment to skim through. What references to fluency do you find, and how many do you see? Now you can see the references to fluency highlighted in turquoise. So you can see that accuracy and fluency are both key in becoming a proficient speaker. In practice, in and out of the classroom, you often find that it's recommended to have accuracy-focused and fluency-focused speaking activities. Let's take a look at those now. Let's start by looking at activities and techniques that focus on fluency. One example of a fluency focus activity is a communicative speaking activity. And communicative speaking activities are really the gold standard when it comes to developing fluency. So you can see an example here. Describe one of your favorite vacations. And this is communicative because you're trying to tell a story or talk about an experience. So this activity, the goal of this activity is communication. It's not to practice a specific grammar structure, but the goal is to achieve a real communicative purpose. In this case, telling someone about your favorite vacation. So you can see the breakdown of the steps here. First, you prepare for 1 or 2 minutes. You think about what you're going to say and you make a few notes. Then you tell your story to a partner, and you can look at your notes, but you don't read from them. Finally, you tell your story to your teacher. So allowing the preparation time means that hopefully you will be able to think about what you want to say, and you will have extended speaking time. So you won't just talk for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, but you'll be able to talk for a bit longer because you've prepared and thought about it in advance. The second and third step allow you to tell your story twice. And this is really crucial because, again, it extends your speaking practice and it gives you a chance to retell a story. And this is really key, this repetition, in building up the skill of fluency. So again, communicative speaking practice, speaking activities are the gold standard when it comes to developing fluency. Another way to build your fluency is to learn filler words and phrases. So first, what are filler words? These are empty words that we use to fill pauses while we're thinking. Some examples in English are, well, you see, the thing is, etc., etc. I'm sure you can think of additional examples. The interesting thing is that textbooks usually don't teach these words, or the ones they teach might be outdated. So in order to learn filler words, you really need to pay attention to your teacher or learn by watching TV or movies. And try to take note of phrases or words that you hear people use a lot when they're pausing for thought. So using filler words is something that is very easy and despite being quite easy, can be very, very impactful when you're talking to native speakers of your target language. Often what people sometimes do is sometimes when they're speaking their target language, they might use filler words from their first language. And this can have a really negative effect on your listener because you sound very much like an English speaker. So in order to sound more fluent and to be able to fill your pauses and thus improve your fluency, make an effort to listen for filler words and phrases in your target language and then use those as much as you can. Finally, our third suggestion for improving your fluency is to learn functional phrases in your target language. Sometimes in language learning, we tend to focus on vocabulary words, but phrases are really critical to building fluency. And that's because once you've learned a phrase, it's automatic. You can use it easily and effortlessly. And as you will notice, these words, automatic, easy, and effortless, these are our descriptors of fluency. So learning phrases can really kick your fluency up a notch. And what I mean when I say functional phrases is phrases that are tied to language functions. So doing something in the target language. One example of a language function is giving opinions. This is a pretty high level language function, something you would probably do around ILR level 2 or approaching level 3, giving opinions and trying to persuade others. And you can see some examples of functional phrases in English here. Now these often are included in textbooks. Often you'll see that textbooks will have a box or a list and they'll say useful phrases. And these really are useful and they're especially useful in improving your fluency. So again, listening out for the ones that are common or for the functions that you use a lot and committing them to memory can really improve your fluency. Now, let's look at some ways to improve accuracy. When it comes to accuracy, both textbooks and teachers usually pay a lot of attention to accuracy. So if you're in a class right now, chances are you're already doing a lot of accuracy-based activities. And what are accuracy-based activities? Some examples are learning a new grammar structure or filling out a grammar practice worksheet. Both of these are focused on making you a more accurate speaker. What else can we do when it comes to improving accuracy? Let's take a look. One critical way to become a more accurate speaker is to monitor yourself. And this just means monitoring your own speech and becoming aware of errors or of gaps, which means things that you don't know how to say yet. Now, this can be tricky because you don't want to cut down on your fluency. And often when you're in a fluency-focused activity, for example, the vacation activity from earlier, describe your favorite vacation, what you need to do there is to kind of turn off your internal grammar monitor so that you can just focus on getting your message out and building your fluency. So it can be hard to turn on that grammar monitor a little bit so that you can start to notice your own speech. But that's what you want to do, is to turn on your inner grammar monitor a little bit. So what you want to do here is, rather than attempting to be perfect, which is unrealistic and exhausting, instead try just to become aware of patterns of error, structures that you consistently have difficulty with, and try to notice those. Once you've identified patterns of error or structures that you really want to focus on and learn, try to find communicative activities that are targeted to that structure. So, for example, let's say that you have difficulty with the past tense in Spanish. A communicative activity might be telling a story, describing your last vacation, or just talking about your weekend. Let's say you have a difficulty with comparative structures. You might have a communicative activity where you compare two different cities and you give someone a recommendation about where to go for their holiday, for their vacation. One important thing here is this final point, which is not to be afraid of making mistakes or discouraged by making mistakes. Often with language learning, and especially with grammar, people tend to think of it in a very cognitive way. They think that we sometimes think that once you've learned a structure, you know it. In the same way that once you learn a fact about history, you know that fact. But language isn't quite like history. A better metaphor for language is something like basketball, where you might learn a specific move or play and you understand it in your mind, in your brain, but that's only part of it. You still have to train yourself and train yourself how to do that move and train your body. And that's a much better metaphor for language learning. It's really training yourself, and as we know, when you're trying to learn to do a new move in a sport, you have to do it several times, and your progress is gradual. So don't be worried about mistakes here. That's natural and it's inevitable, and it means that you're learning. It's a natural part of the process. Another way to improve your accuracy is to notice the grammar structure that you're trying to learn. So if you're working on a particular grammar structure, notice it when reading or when listening. An example of this can be just as simple as taking a newspaper article or even a paragraph from a newspaper article and highlighting the past tense forms, or whatever structure you're working on. So if you're working on comparatives, you might highlight the comparative forms. And even though you're not producing anything here, it will still impact your accuracy because you're increasing your input and you're increasing your exposure to that grammar structure that you're trying to internalize and develop. Finally, another recommendation for improving your accuracy is to record yourself. Now, if you're like me, this can be a difficult recommendation because you might not like to hear yourself talking. Um, but if you can bring yourself to do it, this is really an excellent tool for improving your accuracy, and it also builds your fluency. So give yourself a simple task like tell a story, describe a picture, and then try to speak for 30 seconds, or if you're at a higher proficiency level, maybe a minute. Then listen to your recording and try to find 2 or 3 errors, again focusing on patterns of error. If you're in a class, you can keep an audio journal. So maybe once a week you give yourself a task, you record yourself talking, and you share it with your instructor who can help you find patterns of error and suggestions for improvement. Now, let's wrap up our webinar by putting everything together. One additional piece of the puzzle with accuracy and fluency is that often your personality and your learning style or your learning preference can influence your accuracy or your fluency. So some people will have a natural tendency towards fluency or towards accuracy. And you can see in the chart on the left here that often these fluent speakers will kind of leap ahead at the beginning and achieve a high level. But then they taper off as they really have to buckle down and focus on their accuracy in order to get to a 2+ or a 3. And then on the blue curve, you can see that accurate students will struggle to build that fluency, but will do so at a slower rate, but incrementally. But the accuracy will be there throughout. So this is a natural variation that occurs with students and just because of learning experience or personality type or learning preference. And this is natural and is all going to balance out in the end. So if you're in a class and someone is more fluent or accurate, don't worry too much about it and know that it's going to shake out. One thing to be aware of, though, is that a tendency towards fluency or accuracy is fine, but if, as you're monitoring yourself, you find that you veer too much towards one, you're going to need to push yourself towards the other to find some balance and reach that proficiency. So if you're a highly accuracy-focused speaker, maybe in your class you might have 10 minutes every day where you say, I'm not going to think about errors at all. I am just going to talk and focus on getting my message out there. And conversely, if you're a very fluency focused speaker, you might say every day I'm going to focus on one grammar structure and really focus on producing that structure accurately and try to use it a lot. And so to wrap up here, the focus or the goal that you should be reaching for is to find a balance between accuracy and fluency. Both of these elements of speaking are critical for reaching proficiency. It's also important to recognize that language is a skill that takes time and progress is gradual. And it's important to identify your own language needs and be resourceful in meeting them. This can be anything from having a conversation with your teacher about including more fluency-focused activities or finding an accuracy-focused activity that you can do outside of class. As we wrap up this webinar, here's some questions that you can think about and take away. In your own learning, in and or out of the classroom, do you think that you focus more on accuracy, fluency, or do you think that you have a balanced focus on both? Do you think that you're stronger in one or the other? Which of the techniques would you like to try from this webinar? Or if you reflect on your learning in the past, What techniques or activities have been really helpful in building your accuracy or fluency? And finally, what questions do you have after listening to this webinar? If you have any questions, feel free to email us and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you for attending and good luck in developing your accuracy and your fluency in speaking.